Here. Let me, for some reason it's not, there we go. I'll do a very quick introduction because I really want to get to the really good stuff, but I did want to share that I work for the Attachment and Trauma Network as their parent program director. But the most important thing about me is that I'm a mom to 4 children, and I have been parenting children who have been impacted by trauma. I adopted my son when he was 5 years old. He was born in Romania, and I have a son that has autism, and I have 2 other children. I have 4 children in total, and they're all different ages. My oldest is 23 years old, almost 24, and my youngest is 10. So we're just busy at our house, but lots of good things. So if you're just coming in, go ahead and mute yourself. And then I did want to mention that I've worked in the child services going on 30 years. So I don't think there's anything else you need to know about me, but feel free to ask questions if you have any. I want to go ahead and get started talking about the children that we care for that are in our homes. These children have come from many different situations and backgrounds and all different ages when they come into our home. But one thing is for sure, and that is that no matter when and how they come into our home, they come with a lot of things, history, and they bring things with them. They don't just come to our homes without having brought with them loss. That initial loss could be of birth parents or other family members. With grief, they come into our homes with lots of grief. We have children in our homes that may be of different culture or race or ethnicity than us, and that they also have many different complex family relationships, and most of the time they come to our home with some trauma. So it's important to know that they bring these stories and histories with us because whatever they have brought with us, that's what we want to help them heal. So if you're just coming into the meeting, I'll go ahead and
hello? Hello? They can come out? Okay, thank you.
Let's have
I want to remind you, your phones, there's some people that are not muted and it's causing some background noise. If everybody could just double check that you're muted. Thank you.
One of the things that obviously the Attachment and Trauma Network focuses on is childhood developmental trauma and the attachment issues that come along with that. So let's go ahead and define trauma. A lot of people consider something traumatic to be something like, you know, a plane crash or a car accident, tornado, all those things. Yes, absolutely, that is trauma, and those are traumatic. What we're going to specifically talk about, because there are many different kinds of trauma, is that chronic, complex, pervasive trauma that happens at a very early stage while children are developing and growing. This definition from Dr. Bruce Perry, a psychologically distressing event that is outside the range of usual human experience involving fear, terror, and helplessness. And when you think about a child, that helplessness is really key because children are so vulnerable and dependent on the adults around them. But more than that definition, I like the one below it better because it encompasses more. The top one talks about an event, but really trauma is an experience, a pattern of experiences that impairs the proper functioning of that child.
I understood it out there.
All right, let's have everybody go ahead and mute. And maybe I can.
Ginger, do you have the option to mute everybody?
I was just going to look at that. I'm sure it's on here somewhere. Let me stop sharing for just a minute and try to do that. Oh, mute all. Okay, let's see if that works.
Thank you.
I apologize. I should have done that before. Okay, so with the mute all, if you have a question, we'll have you go ahead and put it in the chat box. And I'll unmute when we get to right before our breaks. Okay. Oh, for some reason I'm still hearing, I'm still hearing you all. Okay, let's try that again.
The mute button at the bottom of the screen.
You may have to go to participants and individually mute anybody who isn't muted.
Okay.
Or if they can just look at the bottom of their screen where they say they're sharing a video, they can press the mute button there.
Yeah, I had pressed that. Mute all participants. Yes. Okay, maybe we got it.
You got it now. Thank you.
Thank you. Except for, okay. All right. We'll get it figured out. Okay. So trauma is more than just an event, because the reason why is that two people can be at that same event and experience it differently. What may be traumatic to one person may not be traumatic to another. So you can be caring for two children in your home that experienced the same type of situation, but they will react very differently to it, right? Every person is different. So it depends on the experience, it depends on the event, and it depends on the effect. Those kind of 3 E's are what we like to define that by, but it is defined personally by the person or child who experienced that. And so the one thing I want to leave you with here is from Dr. Gabor Mate. He says it's just that overwhelming threat that you don't know how to deal with. And so it's not just the things that happen to you, it's what happens inside of you, meaning it's how your stress response system handles and manages that stress, how you heal it and need help healing from it. And it's really kind of sometimes a disconnection. It's not, trauma is not a mental illness, it's a mental injury that we can help heal. And that's our job as caregivers. So I also want to talk about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And hopefully you've all been familiar with this study. This study was done way back in the 1990s, and it was a study to determine health and health outcomes. It had nothing to do with mental health, but what we found out through the ACE study is that mental health directly impacts physical health. So these are experiences that happen to you prior to age 18. Adverse meaning negative, childhood meaning before age 18, experiences that happen. And so there's, you know, physical, emotional, sexual abuse, physical and emotional neglect, and then things like if a parent, someone caregiving for you had a mental illness, was in jail, domestic violence in the home, substance abuse, and divorce. And what this study found out was that these adverse childhood experiences are very common, that, you know, 64% of the adult population walking around today has experienced at least one, but the quarter, 25% of the nation, there has been 3 or more of these adverse childhood experiences. And as the number gets higher, the more negative experiences a child has prior to age 18, then the risks increase for health problems, for high risk behaviors, for difficulty in school, many different things. And it impacts health to the point that there is a higher risk of stroke, of heart attack, of cancer, and early death. So it's a study that really impacts and tells us how important it is to combat those negative things that happen in childhood, because we're not going to be able to cure or fix or make everyone's life perfect. And I would say that is not the purpose of life, is to have everything go well. We learn and grow from positive stress and from difficult things that happen. It just is more about how to understand how risky it is, that it's there's a lot of myths out there that we'll talk about that we need to dispel, because this is such a serious thing. You can go ahead and take an ACE study and find out what your ACE score is. I don't necessarily, here's what I would say about that. It's important to know that you're at risk for health problems and other things because of what happened to you. But what's more important than that is to know what you can do to combat that. So when you're working with a child or talking with a child, I don't think it's a good idea to sit a child down and give them an ACE study or score. It just sends them into shame, because it wasn't their fault. What happened to them was not something that they could control. And so how does them knowing a lot of bad things happen to them, which they already know, talking about that, we don't want to further traumatize them in talking about that. What is more important is the resilience survey that shows what protective factors you have and how you can combat these adverse childhood experiences. So the more important survey is the resilience survey. And we're just going to talk about how we can heal childhood trauma. So I just think it's important to know that the more difficult things a child has in their life, the more they are at risk for these things like drugs and not finishing school and chronic illness. Because we don't always think about how our health is impacted by our mental health. So let's talk about some of those myths that I mentioned. Let me define complex trauma for you. It's ongoing and repeated trauma where the victim is captive. And what I mean by captive is that if the abuse is happening in your home as a child, you really can't escape that on your own without help. And so that is that complex trauma that keeps repeating itself. So the first myth is that impacts from trauma are rare, but that ACE study that I just showed talked about that at least 25% of the population are affected and impacted by ACEs. So trauma is not rare. Also, as we are currently in this pandemic, we are now seeing effects from a collective trauma. And so the number 25% is actually quite low. The next myth is that a child is too young to remember. But we know now from the brain science and from MRI scans of children being scanned at very young age that although cognitively a child may not be able to say, when I was 1 year old, this happened to me and remember that, their body remembers. There is a book called The Body Keeps the Score, and it is very educational and discusses how our bodies remember. And when a child is abused before they have those language skills, they're not able to repeat what has happened, but their body retains that. So even a newborn will have an impact of trauma if something traumatic was done to them, even in the womb. So a child exposed in the womb by substance abuse, it will impact them. I also hear some people say that they'll grow out of it, but what we know is that we can heal trauma, but it doesn't just happen on its own. There are a lot of things we can do to build resilience. but we have to be intentional about it and not just expect that we'll get better over time. We also don't want to always blame a parent, because there are many things that can cause a child to have difficult behaviors, and a lot of it can have to do with epigenetics and generational traumas. So there are many factors that help a child and hurt a child. I also want to dispel the myth that it's no big deal. Now, because of the ACE study, we know that what happened to a child and what happened to us as adults when we were children can really, truly impact us and be a big deal. If we just have that mentality that we just need to get over it, it wasn't a big deal, it actually re-traumatizes us and makes us feel shame, because what happened to us was not our fault. And so trauma is not a competition, you know, just because someone had something horrific happen to them and we had something that we would think is less horrific, it doesn't mean that what happened to us doesn't matter or doesn't impact us. So we need to watch for that. Also, when talking about medications, there isn't a pill to cure trauma, but there are medications that do help with depression and anxiety. And so we can treat symptoms, but I'm not advocating here or there. I'm just saying there's no necessary pill for, trauma, but that there are a lot of things along the way that can help depending on very individual circumstances. So let's talk a little bit about that stress response system. I mentioned before that we all experience stress, and not all stress is bad. There is good stress out there, right? That gets us out of bed in the morning, that helps us to learn and grow and get out of our, increase our comfort level. And then there is stress that we tolerate and we manage and we handle. And we do that not because we're pull ourselves up from our bootstraps, but we do that because of protective factors, things like relationships, where we go to a friend and we vent, or someone helps us through something difficult. That's kind of that tolerable, manageable stress. But what happens when that tolerable stress gets to be too much and we can't handle it because it is prolonged and it never goes away, and we don't have those protective factors? Maybe we don't have friends or family or support to help us manage that stress, then it becomes toxic. And by toxic, I actually mean poison. That's why it's called toxic stress. When our body constantly releases stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, those stress hormones are supposed to be given to us in very limited, small amount of times. When we were, cavemen, we needed to run if a bear was chasing us. We needed to survive, and that's why we have those stress hormones, to alert us of danger. But now, as we have evolved over time, what happens, especially to a child, is that if they are constantly running from that bear, if that bear is someone in their home who is abusing them and they can't escape that bear, then their stress response system is constantly alerting them of danger, right? You need to run, you need to flee, you need to get help. But if a young child can't, because they are too young, too vulnerable, then constantly their body is flooded with stress hormones trying to help them, but it's actually hurting them. And that constant release of those hormones is like pouring battery acid on that child's developing brain. It is poisoning them. And that's why, as that child grows, that ACE survey showed us that they're at risk for heart attack, for stroke, for early death, or the pain is so much that they engage in substance abuse. Why? Because if we do drugs, we feel better for that moment, right? We numb the pain. So that's why that ACE survey shows that children who have experienced difficult things are more at high risk for drug abuse or something else to escape and numb the pain, like a relationship that is abusive, right? Because it's what they know, it's what's comfortable, it's what they can tolerate, it's what they're used to, it's what they feel they can control. So that's a little bit about toxic stress and why it's such an issue. We're gonna go a little bit more into that, but I think I just was trying to think of if I missed anything there. Okay, hold on just a second. We admit someone into the room. So what I'm going to talk to you next about is that what we see in our children are these behaviors that come out that are really difficult. I apologize. Let me check one thing. Okay, we're good. Let me go back to the share screen. Oops. Oh my goodness. There we go. Okay, so what it looks like have you seen these behaviors in your home? Have you had a child that is oppositional, is argumentative, stubborn, won't listen to you, very challenging of authority? Anything you say, they fight, that is dangerous and violent, that is aggressive. I am sure you have seen some of these behaviors in your home, and they're very difficult and they're very frustrating, and we want the behavior to stop. But my goal for you today is to come around to that paradigm shift, that the reason they are acting this way is because it is an actual trauma reaction. They are responding to something that maybe happened right there in the moment that triggered them, that activated their response system, or they may be reacting to something that happened to them in the past, and they don't know how to control it. They don't know what else to do. This is their go-to behavior. It's worked for them before because they're in survival mode and they're sensing a threat and they're protecting themselves. It can be something that we have no idea why they're reacting that way. A lot of the times they don't know why they're reacting that way. Something is going on inside. They feel sick. They feel frustrated. They feel angry, mad, sad, scared. And so this is how they act out. It feels very personal, but it is not personal. It is a trauma reaction. So that's fight behavior is one of those trauma reactions. The other is flight. Do you have children in your home that appear to be distracted, that they're not paying attention, hyperactive, running away, hiding? In school, do they avoid, go into the bathroom? Or I hear this one a lot, that they're seeking attention. They're negative attention seeking. All they want is attention. They're very demanding of time. I want to reframe that into that they are seeking connection. They are trying to express a need, and it comes out in a way that can be frustrating and difficult for us, but that it is actually a plea for help, a plea for connection, a plea to help them resolve what is ever going on inside that stress response system in their body. Something has triggered that. They feel the need to protect themselves, and so they do all these behaviors in order to complete that stress response cycle. The other one is freeze. These are children who are talked about as being lazy, daydreaming, not trying, not seeming to care about anything, not applying themselves, withdrawn. Freeze is a response to trauma. These are kids who shut down because they can't handle that pain and can't handle what we are asking them to do. They're not able to meet expectations. And so this is what it looks like, but it is a trauma reaction. And what happens because of this is that I want you to look at this iceberg. On top of this iceberg is what we see. We see them running away. We see them lying, stealing, hurting themselves, not listening to us, being angry. All those responses that I just talked about in that previous screen, that's what we see. But that's not actually what's going on inside of them. What's going on inside is that because they don't feel safe, because they're scared of something, because they're embarrassed, and they feel rejected, they feel isolated, worthless, all of those things. That's actually what's really going on inside. And the response to those feelings are the ones on top. And so I think it's really important to know that and sit with that, because when we actually understand what's going on, then we respond differently to those behaviors. If we just see someone lying or stealing, oftentimes what we want to do is punish that, right? But if we understood that the reason that they are lying is because they're scared, the reason they're stealing is they're afraid they won't have something, or that they have gone without so long that they are threatened by the idea that they'll never have what they need, then maybe we wouldn't consequence them the same way. So I want you to keep that iceberg in mind, and really try to reframe what the behavior is telling us. So one of the things I'll just touch on really quick is a couple behaviors that seem to frustrate parents the very most. One of those is attention seeking that I made mention of before. But I really want to reframe that attention seeking as connection seeking. We talk a lot about fight, flight, freeze. There are other trauma responses. One of them is called FAWN, F-A-W-N. And what that means is that this is a child who is a follower. They're a people pleaser. They need a lot of connection. They seek a lot of attention from us, and it can be very difficult. It can drain us, and we see it as a very negative thing. But what actually is happening is that they didn't get what they needed early on in life. Children who are neglected often seek a lot of attention and a lot of connection because they can't fill their own cup. They can't build that themselves. So we have to build that and fill their cup until they can on their own. And usually what happens, I hear a lot when a child is seeking that, is that people will say, just ignore them. But if you have noticed, a lot of times those behaviors get worse when we ignore. So instead, if you can reframe that as that they need connection and then give that connection, offer that relationship and that safety, then usually we see that the behavior actually decreases. The other behavior I want to talk about is that sabotaging, that self-sabotaging. It's really frustrating. It doesn't make sense, right? It's like, why does a child do something to sabotage when they've been given something? Why do they break it before we can even, enjoy whatever has been given to them? But that's not what's going on. It looks like sabotage, but what it really is a desperate need for control, that they haven't had control in their situation, and this ability to sabotage gives them that control. And I also want to talk about something called can't versus won't. We're going to talk a little bit more about it later, but I'll just introduce it here. A lot of times we think that When we ask a child to do a chore or to do their homework or to do wherever we're asking them to do, put your clothes away. We just did the laundry, put your clothes away. You came home from school, you threw your backpack and your jacket on the floor. That's what happens at my house every single day. And I say, buddy, hang your backpack up, hang your jacket up. He comes in the house, he kicks off his shoes in the middle of the floor. Put your shoes away so we don't all trip on them. And then they don't do it. They completely disregard what we're saying. I'm tired. I don't want to. Don't tell me what to do. You're not in charge of me. You're not my mom, right? That's really frustrating. But many times when a child's stress response system is activated, when they've been triggered by something, when they're really struggling, they can't do what we ask them to do. Listen, I know that he is capable of putting his shoes away because he's done it before. So I know he can do it again. But what I have to remember is in that moment that I just asked him to do something, because as soon as I ask him, he blows up, right? I'm like, why are you overreacting? It's not that big of a deal. Just put your shoes away. But I have to stop and remember something happened. Something's going on inside. I need to help him do that. I need to calm him down first. This is a can't versus a won't. He will be able to do it. He will do it. But rather than me pouring gasoline on the fire and getting very angry and starting in on the consequences because he wouldn't listen to me, I have to stop, calm myself down first, and then help him and encourage him and walk beside him and find out what happened. Did something happen today at school? Are you hungry? Are you tired? Most of the time, he's hungry and tired. And once I calm that down and get that regulated, then we can go back to finishing what we're asking him to do. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but let's go ahead and move on. Because here's what happens. All those behaviors on top that I showed you on top of that iceberg, the lying, the stealing, the running away, the scary sexual behaviors, the drug abuse, we want those to stop and they're awful, right? But if we don't understand that the reason those behaviors are happening is what's going on under the iceberg, that they may be scared, they may be embarrassed, they may be feeling absolutely worthless and hate themselves, then we misunderstand these kids, we mislabel them, we mistreat them, and then they get misdiagnosed. I am sure that many of you have seen these diagnoses before and have them in your home. And I want to pose to you that some of them may be completely inaccurate diagnoses and that they might not be what's actually going on. Some of these diagnoses I don't even truly believe exist. I believe that they were created to treat symptoms, the things that are on top of the iceberg. But I also understand that these diagnoses help us get treatment and that insurances will not pay for treatment and medication without some of these diagnoses. So I am not saying that we shouldn't or can't have them. I'm saying we have to really understand that this might not be what's going on. ADHD might actually be hypervigilance, which is a child completely feeling unsafe, being activated all the time, sensing threat and danger all the time, and being aware of their surroundings all the time, scanning the environment all the time. It looks like ADHD because they're not paying attention, they're not looking you in the eyes, they're not following directions, they're not getting their work done. But what could be happening is that they are completely always trying to figure out if they are safe. So if an ADHD medication is not helping and not working, it may be that they have ADHD symptoms, but they actually don't have ADHD. So once we start healing the trauma, those ADHD symptoms may decrease, should decrease. But there also are situations where children have true ADHD. So it depends. But I want you to just think about, do we have the correct diagnosis? Is there something going on beneath the iceberg? Are they doing these behaviors because of what happened to them in their early childhood? Because when these kids are growing, that 0 to 18, the brain is constantly developing. So if a child has experienced neglect or trauma, constant toxic stress, abuse, maybe they were impacted in utero by drugs and alcohol, then those things have impacted that child's brain development. Now the child's brain is wired differently. There may be gaps and holes that did not develop, and that is causing these behaviors. So that's pretty disheartening and frustrating and sad and depressing, but I'm starting out this way so that we can spend the rest of the time talking about the good news and how to help that and heal that. But I want to check my time first of all. Okay, we're almost going to be taking a break soon. But first, I want to go through these brain basics. I am not a neuroscientist. I don't expect you to be neuroscientists. I just want to teach you some basic things about the brain, because once you understand these basic brain tenets, I promise you, you will look at these children differently. You will look at them, you'll look through their skull and picture that brain and see something's not firing in the brain right now. Something's not working. There might be a gap there that I need to address and help, rather than just expect them to do something, yell at them to do something, punish them for not doing something. Instead, you may be able to look at them and go, oh my goodness, I think we have a gap here that we really need to work on. So let me go through these as quickly as I can. The first one is that the brain develops from the bottom up and the inside out. This is important for you to know, because the brain develops, okay, look at this picture of this little boy wearing a business suit. This is our reminder that this child has not developed to the point where they can become a banker and process our loan. They're not there yet. That is to remind us that these children's brains impacted by abuse or neglect are not fully developed, even more so than a child who hasn't experienced abuse or neglect or any other thing that has happened to them. They're not ready yet. They're very much behind. And so they cannot do something that they're not ready for. They may not be able to do what we are asking them to do. We have to shift our expectations. They have to go through their developmental stages first. Most of the children in our care, what if you have a 10-year-old that you're taking care of? They are 10 years old chronologically, but I want you to consider that they are not 10 years old developmentally. Most of these kids are about half of their age. My son that I talked to you about that, sorry, let me admit these people into the room. My son that was adopted, he was much younger developmentally. And once I understood that here he was 6 years old and not potty trained, that actually he was only about 2 or 3 years old developmentally, then I understood why he wasn't potty trained yet. And I wasn't as angry or frustrated with him. I knew that I had to help him. He needed help to become potty trained because he was not a typical 6-year-old, okay? So all the things that we're expecting and are asking our children to do, they just may not be ready to do. And we have to be patient, and we have to parent them at a younger age. So let's talk a little bit about our expectations when it comes to executive functioning. Most of the things in school that we ask our kids to do, they have to multitask and plan ahead, especially kids that are in middle school and high school. They have to problem solve and focus their attention. But what I'm saying to you is they can't yet. So instead of us being angry and frustrated that they're not doing all these things, they're not controlling their impulses, we have to understand that they're not able to do that yet. This executive functioning ability doesn't actually fully develop until we are adults. So I think all along we as parents and caregivers and school teachers have been, expecting too much. I'm not saying that we can't expect our children, it's that they may require more help, and that we need to be very aware of how we treat them and talk to them and consequence them. So there's a lot of things we can do to help these kids now that we know that they aren't able to really do these things without help, and that it may take more time. We can break things down into smaller bite-sized pieces, give them maybe one direction at a time. I typically would say to my kids, okay, I need you to do this, 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 and this. That's too much. They've already forgotten what step 4 was. So I have to say, okay, first, let's do this. Do you need help with it? And then once that's done, I can say, next, let's move on to that. So writing things down for them helps, giving them a checklist, modeling it for them. They might not just know how to do it on their own. And that's why they got frustrated and might get really angry and avoid it. It's because they may need help doing it. Okay, I got to watch my time here. I wanted to get through these brain basics before we take a break. So number 2 is use it or lose it. What I'm saying is that what we use in our brain gets strengthened if we use it, and if we don't use it, we lose it, meaning it gets pruned away. That's what those pruning shears are for. So the best example I can give you here is like when you go to the gym. If you were to pump, iron every day on your arms, you'd get really big, strong biceps. But that doesn't mean that your legs would get strong, right? You have to use those muscles in order for your legs to get strong. Pumping biceps in the arms is not going to strengthen the leg muscles. And the same is true for the brain. If you use that part of your brain that is always sensing threat and danger and giving into that, then that's going to become very strengthened. And that's what happens in kids that have been abused and neglected and have difficult things to them. That's the part of their brain that's really strong and really big. And that's why they're just all the time sensing threat, because it's being used all the time. And the part that's getting pruned away is that executive functioning that I just talked about, that prefrontal cortex that wants to use. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for things like multitasking, language processing, memory, and all those things that we expect our kids to do may have been pruned away or may have not been developed at all. So we have to, by pattern and repetition, do those things and help them and walk them through it over and over again until that's the part that becomes strengthened. We're going to talk about how to do that later, but I want to lay that groundwork for you that that's why they're acting the way they are. They're not in control. That part of the brain is in control that always senses danger. So that's why they act the way they do, as opposed to being in control and stopping. When we say stop doing that, they can't. We have to help them stop doing that and wire that in that way, because they're working from this view of mistrust. And if they don't trust, then they always sense danger and feel that everything is a threat, even things that are safe. Okay. Let's go to number 3. What fires together, wires together. Our brain is a supercomputer that wants to be really efficient and really fast. And so it builds these neural pathways. And if a child has been raised in a situation where it's chaos, then that is how the brain is wired. Then that's why these kids that you see why do they always self-sabotage? Why are they always living in chaos? Why do they always like the drama? It's not that they like it, it's that it's what they know. It's what feels comfortable. It's what is familiar to them. And that's how their brain is wired. So our goal is to rewire it to the calm. You see one little girl being, really upset and the other girl being really calm. It didn't just happen. We had to shift it that way. We're going to talk about how to do that. But some of these kids are wired for the chaos, and we're going to try to rewire them into the calm. But it doesn't just happen. It has to be intentionally worked out. All right, last one here is this neuroplasticity. It's the good news. It's the hope. We used to think that a child's brain and an adult brain was set in stone and wired, and that we couldn't change it. But because of neuroscience now and studies that have come out and MRIs of the brain, we now know that our brains are malleable. They're plastic. They can be changed. They can be rewired. And that can happen our whole lives. It happens through new experiences. Every time you have a new experience in your life, a new neural pathway is created. So when I keep talking about we're going to rewire their brain, what I'm saying is we're going to give them new positive experiences that outweigh the negative ones. And the more we do that, the more rewiring we can do. So I think we're going to stop. Let me just make sure I've covered this part that I wanted to get to. We're going to talk about how to do that when we get back. But somebody had mentioned that they have a child who seems to enjoy the chaos. No matter how much they try to redirect and give positive input, it doesn't work. This child creates havoc and what seems to be intentionally disruptive behavior. I believe you. I totally believe you. I have been there. I have seen it. I know this to be true. It definitely does seem like they enjoy it. And I'll tell you why. And it's not that I'm 100% right or know everything. This is my best guess. And I believe in this, is that there is a point of them that does enjoy it because it gives them control. Most of the time, these children have come from places where they absolutely had zero control, zero ability to predict their environment, and not being able to predict what is going to happen next is terrifying. And it causes the body to release cortisol and adrenaline. And when that happens, you have to do something about it because it's scary and it hurts. Or the other thing that adrenaline does, do you remember what adrenaline does? It gives you a rush, right? People seek adrenaline. That's why people do drugs. That's why people exercise to the point where they get the runner's high, or that's why they engage in risky behavior. Risky behavior gives you an adrenaline rush, and that feels good. And so kids who constantly want to control the situation, a lot of times we call it manipulate, sabotage, create chaos. It's an adrenaline rush and it gives them control. And I also understand that just redirecting them, which is a good technique, or giving them a lot of positive, which is what I've told you to do, it doesn't really stop it or fix it. It may for a minute, but it doesn't stop it for good. I get that. That is a huge frustration here. So the really, tricky thing is that this therapeutic parenting, which we're going to try to learn and engage in, takes a lot of time, takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of repetition. right now, a child that is managing chaos and living in chaos and enjoying it because it's comfortable, it's what they know, it's how they're wired, their brains become efficient that way, that chaos becomes really contagious to us. Have you noticed that? That the whole house becomes chaotic? It's because it truly is contagious. And I'm going to talk about that later. It's called mirror neurons. Our neurons in our brain reflect one another. So we can either give into the chaos or we can start to take control and reflect calm. And then slowly but surely, we're going to outweigh the chaos with the calm. But it takes a lot of time and a ton of repetition. So say you have like a 10-year-old who has had, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 years of chaos and managing that. It may take that long, hopefully not, of the positive repetitions and redirections and rewiring to balance and manage that out and change and shift the thing. So we just have to be very persistent and keep at it. But I don't think it will take, it depends on the child. It doesn't always take as long to rewire. So there are a lot of things that we're going to do in the meantime, and I'm going to show you them that will help hopefully kind of speed that up. It just depends. It depends on the child's impact. If they were severely impacted by alcohol and drugs in the womb, that is going to take longer and be harder. And I don't know what necessarily the outcome is for each child, but we have to keep at it and we have to be patient. I know it's hard. You have to consider your health and your mental health and other children in the home. We can't just give in to the chaos. We have to protect everybody in the home and really try to keep this therapeutic environment going. But if we give in to the chaos and yell and threaten and physically punish, it will solidify and make that chaotic wiring stronger. And so we have to pull all that out. But I understand and I believe you that they enjoy it and that what you're doing isn't working. I'm going to try to give you more hope and give you more techniques to try as well, because sometimes what works for one, you may not have tried yet. So let's talk more about that as we go further along. Okay. Let me see. Go ahead.
I am new to foster parenting, about a month in here. And I have a nearly 15-year-old boy who has recently kind of started lying. Like, I think we're through the honeymoon period. I mean, he's been to 11 schools and I don't know, probably that many foster homes. And I don't know how to make him feel safe so that because he will eventually tell me the truth. And then he's like, I'm afraid I was going to get in trouble. I'm like, well, now that you've lied, you're going to get in trouble. But if you would have told me the truth, there would be less consequences. I mean, we're 4 weeks into school and he's already had a 3-day in-school suspension. I found drugs and vaping. And I'm also a single parent, so makes it twice as difficult maybe. And I don't know how to make him feel safe enough to be honest and to start maybe wanting to break those habits or wanting to do better.
Yeah. Oh, this is so good. First of all, you are so right on in understanding that the reason why he's lying is because he does not feel safe. And I am sure that he wants to feel safe, but doesn't know how. Just because all of a sudden you're in a safe environment physically does not mean your body realizes it and takes it in and embraces it, especially when we've talked about that wiring. He's been wired for unsafety. It's going to take a while for him to feel safe. doesn't reflect on you personally. You're not unsafe because he might feel that you are right now. He's, like you said, there was that testing period. It's going to come. It's going to come over time when you are repeatedly modeling, showing, expressing through your verbal, through your nonverbal that you're safe. But it's going to take time. These kids have been in such unsafe environments for so long that they don't have that trust. So he'll get there. If what you're doing is creating safety, he'll get there. We're going to talk about specific ways to create safety in just a second, just in a handful of slides. But that is exactly what you need to do, is create that safety. And once his body recognizes, it's called felt safety. It's very different than physical safety. It's feeling safe, and that your stress response system is activating less. It's getting less triggered. Then they will respond less. He will lie less when his body understands that he is safe. So you will get there. But you're right, it has to be through safety. And so consequencing at this stage is really tricky because he already knows that he's done something wrong. He knows he's going to get in trouble. And so that's preventing him from feeling like he can tell the truth. So I would be very careful with consequences at this stage. I'm not saying that you don't need to. I'm just saying that even talking it out with him can be a consequence. And him,
He's not a big fan of that. But car rides with teenage boys are great for conversation.
yes, car rides are really good because it takes the pressure off of them having to look you in the eyes, which can also feel very unsafe and make them feel very vulnerable. But just sitting and talking gives him the opportunity to regulate and get that stress response system less activated. And that will give him a feeling of safety, like, okay, she has told me that if, I don't lie, then I won't get this consequence, and she's following through with it, then maybe I can handle this. The talking is hard because we're going to remember the brain basics that I talked to you about. That whole talking piece is part of that executive functioning piece that comes online later. It really gets hijacked by the amygdala. So we always want to sit down with our kids and have a really good talk and work it out, but some of them just aren't capable. And so if he's capable, use that. If he's not, don't expect him to, kind of a thing.
He's pretty good. And I always can tell when he's like, we change the subject, then we
yeah,
anything else except that. I guess in my biggest concern is consequences. I mean, I'm fighting drugs, I'm fighting vaping, he's fighting, he's lying, he's getting sneaky. And for me, I don't want to over consequence it.
Right.
But there also needs to be consequences for action.
Right.
So then I'm like, okay. And then of course, this is first time parenting for me. So jumped straight into teenage years. I get a whole lot of advice from everybody else about what I'm supposed to do. And I think that I'm doing the right thing. They're like, you should take everything away, the PlayStation. Yeah.
It's
and
that balance. We don't want to be overly punitive and we don't want to be overly permissive. Neither is safety. Being overly permissive with a child creates a feeling of not being safe. There has to be structure, routine, rules, boundaries. That is what creates safety. So we'll talk more about that, but it is finding the right consequence and not being overly punitive, because that sends them into danger, fight, flight, freeze. And, it just perpetuates that cycle. But having those really good talks with him will really help to create that safety, and finding substitutions. The risky behavior, the drug seeking behavior, is typically because they're feeling pain and they want to numb the pain. So how can we address the pain? How can we help heal when does the pain start? When do you start to feel so anxious that you just want the pain to go away and you just want to smoke, you just want to drink, you just want to do drugs so that it feels better? What happened right before that? Was it talking with someone? Was it something at school? Was it that you were bored? All those things can be, we can fix that. We can work around that. We can modify things at school. We can modify things at home. We can do things that feel good that aren't drugs, you know? So, but it does take a higher level of thinking to be able to do that. And a lot of our kids aren't there yet. So we have to kind of say, you know, I was wondering what was happening before that, or I was wondering what you were thinking or feeling. And a lot of times they'll say, I don't know. That used to be a big trigger for me when my son said, I don't know why I did that. I'd say, why'd you do that? I don't know why. And it would just make me mad because I'm like, yeah, you do. You were there. You knew. But after all learning about the brain, he didn't know. He really didn't know. It was like he was not in control of his body and his brain. And so once he was able to gain control, but a lot of things that happened to him happened before he had language skills. So he couldn't put the two together. He couldn't tie words to the feelings. So we had to really model that and talk about that. And I had to quit asking why, because it didn't solve it. It didn't help it. It just shamed him because it made him feel like he should know, but he didn't. So he was stupid and he was embarrassed and he wasn't worth anything. So I had to quit asking why he did it and just talk about that what happened to you was not your fault. And now we're in a situation where you constantly feel threatened. And so you're lying about it. And then we talk about what you can do instead, you know, and not consequencing the lying at first until it started, you know, decreasing and he could get a hold of it and understand why. So it's really hard to consequence things that they're not in control of and they're not their fault. But that's a really gray area. So I don't have all the answers. This is just to really get you thinking about why they're doing things and what happened to them and what we should be consequencing and what that behavior is trying to communicate to us. And that's where we work on solving. If they're scared, but they're hitting someone beside because they're scared, why are we consequencing that they hit someone? Why don't we fix the fear and then they won't hit? So it's tough, you guys. It's seriously so hard. I know. And I don't know everything. I don't know what it's like being a single mom and parenting a 15-year-old that has been in 10 different homes. I mean, I can only imagine. So, but, I know what I was going to say really quick. I'll get to this later, but in depth. But right now, I want you to know you have to take care of yourself because you cannot take care of these kids if you're not okay. And a lot of us are not okay. We've been through our own stuff. We're living in a pandemic. We're tired. We're burnt out. It's not that we're tired. It's that we're so tired. We're exhausted. We are drained. We don't feel good. And so we're just giving, but we don't have anything to give. And so when we do that, we're not, at least for me, when I'm really tired, that's when I start yelling and that's when I start being dismissive and that's when I just don't have any compassion. So I really have to, and I know it's really hard and sometimes almost impossible to take care of ourselves. So I'm not talking about going to the spa and, all of that. I'm talking about all the things that we're teaching our kids how to manage our stress systems. We have to do. We have to breathe and take breaks and try to get sleep and keep ourselves, eating, all those things that we're telling our kids you have to do, we have to do ourselves. We have to model that for them. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later, but for now, keep that in mind that you've got to also take care of yourselves. Okay, I want to show you this brain and hand model. And I think what I'll do, okay, am I on the screen? You can just see me, right? Okay,
Oh, I
I'm
see.
going to show you this brain and hand model by Dr. Dan Siegel because it's a great tool to teach our kids. This is something that you're going to walk your kids through and give them language for so that you have this common language for what's going on inside of them. Because we have to know with our kids what's firing in their brain and what's misfiring. So that you're going to start, this is your hand. We're going to turn it into a brain. This part of your arm right here is the brain stem. It's the lower part of your brain, the animal part of your brain. I've heard it called the reptilian brain. It's just that brain stem that goes, up from your neck up into your brain. Right here at the base of your hand is the cerebellum. This is the part of your brain that is responsible for like heart rate, digestion, breathing. You don't think about those things. Those things just happen automatically. It just has to happen in order for us to live. So you don't worry about that. That is always happening. It happens without any conscious thought. Okay, this mid part of your hand is the mid part of the brain, and you're going to fold your thumb over. This is the limbic system, and it has like the hippocampus and the amygdala. And I don't want you don't have to worry about all the little terms, but you will hear a lot. I hope you've heard before this amygdala. I use this term a lot because this is where in the child's brain and everybody's brain is the threat detection system, the fire alarm, the fight, flight, freeze. This is what is in control when our kids are acting out and when we're really frustrated because they're screaming or they're running away or they're dissociating, they're hiding, whatever they're doing. This is why, this is where it comes from, and this is what's in charge. So that's where it's at. Okay, up here, we're going to fold our hand over. This is the cortex, and this part right here where our fingernails sit is our prefrontal cortex. And the reason I want you to know about this is where that executive functioning sits. So remember what executive functioning is in charge of: processing, multitasking, following directions, language, memory. Those are pretty important things. And this is where they are. And this is where we always want to be. If we're looking like this, that means that we're learning and we're growing and we're talking and we're having relationship and we're calm and we have flexibility, right? That's the goal. But do you remember what I told you about this mid part of the brain for kids that have been impacted by trauma? Is this the part of the brain that's in control and in charge and being accessed? No, this is. So this hand brain model is all about flipping our lid. We call it flipping our lid. When a child starts to become dysregulated, this part of the brain goes offline and allows this part of the brain to become in charge. So here's what it looks like. For us as adults, what happens, I've got a couple people in the waiting room and I've got somebody that I need to mute. If you can mute yourselves, that's really helpful. Okay. So say you're in traffic and all of a sudden somebody slams on their brakes and horns are honking. Here's what it looks like. Our lid starts to flip because the amygdala senses danger. We need to slam on our brakes, right? Now, what happens next is we slam on our brakes, our heart rate's kind of beating, but we didn't hit the car in front of us and the car behind us didn't hit. So we go, I'm okay. Oh my gosh, I just escaped an accident. Everything's okay. Thank heavens. And then our lid goes back down again because we know everything's okay. But here's what happens in a child who has been abused or neglected or had anything adversely done to them. they don't understand that they're okay. Their lid does not come back down again. They start to flip their lid and it remains flipped. And so now they're yelling, they're screaming, they're crying, and you're like, what's wrong? Everything's fine. And they're like, I don't know, or I hate you, or whatever. It's because their lid is flipped. And so it's our job as their caregiver to get that lid back down and calm that down. Well, how do we do that? Is it by yelling and screaming and telling them, stop, you're fine, quit your whining, everything's fine, I don't know why you're acting this way? Does that make them calm down? No, all that does is keep the lid flipped, because now they're not only sensing danger from the car accident or whatever, but they're sensing danger for you. So the first thing we have to do is calm ourselves down and go, that was really scary, wasn't it? I wasn't sure what was going to happen, but luckily everything's okay. Why don't we take some deep breaths? I feel like my heart's beating and I just really need to calm down for a minute. Maybe we need to pull over and maybe we need to take a minute. However you do that, it's different from everybody. I use the example of a possible car accident, but it could have been something at school, right? That the teacher said, okay, guys, we only have 5 minutes left. You got to hurry and finish your test. And if you don't finish it, you're gonna have to stay in from recess. What starts to happen to that child's lid? Starts to flip, right? And actually, typically it doesn't start to flip, it goes immediately into flipping. There is no slow process like, am I in danger? Can I finish the test? It's like, crap, everything is bad. I'm not going to finish the test. And now I'm not going to get to go to recess. And then mom's going to be mad at me. And then I'm going to get punished. And then it's going to be the end of the world. I hate myself. I seriously hate myself. Why am I so stupid? Why can't I do what I'm asked to do? That's what it looks like. Okay. The lid is flipped. So talking about the lid flipping to your child is awesome. It's seriously important. And here's why. First of all, everybody's lid flips. It's a normal thing to have stress. It's a normal thing to be frustrated. It's a normal thing to be mad. It's okay to be totally scared when you're almost in an accident. It's okay to be scared when you only have 5 minutes left to finish a test. It's okay to be worried about if you're whatever worry you're worried about, that's okay. It's normal in life to have worries and fears. That it's not that we're going to take away the worries and fears, it's that we're going to manage them. The important thing is that when you start to feel mad, sad, scared, whatever that negative feeling is, that you recognize it and control it. So by controlling it, I don't mean fixing it or solving it. I mean recognizing it. So what you can do with kids when you're talking about this hand brain model is just explain it. You know, this is your downstairs brain, and that's where, you know, your breathing and digestion, where all that takes place. And then tell them about the amygdala. This is a fire alarm. This tells you that there might be danger. Sometimes you think there's danger and there's not danger. That's okay. We're going to fix that. We're going to talk about it. But just so you know, a lot of times you feel like there's danger even when there's not. Your body's telling you that. It's not your fault. This is where we want your brain to be, safely covering and protecting your alarm system so that when there is real danger, that it will work. It's there to help us. It's there to tell us there's danger. You need to be worried about it. You need to protect yourself. But when you're safe, we want you to feel safe. And this is what it looks like. So you can teach a child in a lot of words like I just did, or for very young children or children who are developmentally younger than their age, you can talk about it in colors. This is what green looks like. Green is good. Green is go. We are go for life. We are calm. We're cozy. We're connected. This is yellow. What does yellow mean? It means warning, right? It means the light at the intersection is about to turn red. So we better slow down. Once we are yellow, let's stop. Let's take a few breaths. Let's ask for help. Let's do something that calms us down so that when we're at yellow, we can go back to green. From yellow, we can go to green. From yellow, we can go to red, but we don't want to go to red. So yellow, let's go back to green. And this is red. So a child can say, Mom, I am in the red zone. Mom, I'm feeling like I'm yellow. Can you help me calm down? How are you doing today, bud? I'm good. I'm green. Or for children that don't even have that much language, you can just do the signs. You can look at them and say, how are you feeling? And they can say like this. They can say this, or they can say this. And then everybody's on the same page. We know where we're at. And that helps you to know how to intervene. You're going to have a different response for this than you are for this, right? So it helps you, because sometimes we as parents overreact. You don't want to overreact if a child's here. You don't actually want to overreact if a child's here, but your reaction is going to be different. This is all about getting everybody safe. This is about everything's cool. How can we get back down? Okay. And I'm going to teach you things to do when we're here and things to do when we're here. So I just wanted to show you that hand-brain model because it is such a powerful way to empower kids, to help them get back in control, that they can learn that they can control their reactions. And it takes the shame out of their behaviors because everybody flips their lid. It's completely normal. And when you feel calm, you can model that for them and be their partner rather than, someone who they feel like might be a threat. Do you remember what I told you about can't versus won't? This brain hand model shows you that once their lid starts to flip, and once their lid is flipped, whatever you're asking them to do, stop, don't do that. Why are you doing that? Calm down. They cannot do what you're asking them to do. They do not have control of their prefrontal cortex. And that's where they may not even be hearing you. They may not even be listening to you because they don't have control of their processing and their language. All of that, the hearing, when you're talking to them, are you listening to me? They may not be able to listen to you at that time. They may not be able to process what you're telling them to do. Once the lid is flipped, they can't multitask, they can't follow directions, they can't follow what you're saying, they can't. So you have to get them calmed down so that then you can sit down and say, let's talk about what happened. You can't do that until they are calm and regulated. So can't versus won't. Keep thinking about that because that really should shape how you respond and how you interact with the child. Okay, let's move on. To the next one. Okay. So this is exciting because we have been talking about how all the difficult things that happen to our kids, how it creates this trauma. And then in response to that these behaviors come out. So now it's really exciting that we get to talk about how to shift out of that mindset of trauma and into the mindset of healing trauma. And we do that through relationship, resilient, and we do that through building resilience, and we build resilience through relationships. So what is resilience? It's the ability to overcome those hardships that those kids have had. I want you to think about all those terrible, awful things that happened. I want you to think about how to overcome them. That doesn't define us. It's not who we are. And we as adults, what happened to us as children, that's not who we are. We can become resilient and spring forward and navigate through those changing environments. But the issue is that we're not born resilient. We have to build it. We have to create it and teach it. And so how do we do that? Well, I want to show you this picture of this fulcrum, this teeter-totter. And on the one side is the negative things that happen, but on the other side is the positive. And so can you picture that you've got, you know, maybe one difficult thing, maybe 100. And so the more that you add in the positive and outweigh the negative, that is how we continue to do that. We pile on lots of positive experiences for these children through repetition, and then slowly over time, it heals that and builds resilience. And so how, you know, we're going to talk about how to do that. Well, the important thing for you to know is that the single most common factor for children who develop resilience is at least one stable, committed relationship with a supportive parent, caregiver, or other adult. It's a teacher who loves us. It's a foster parent who poured into us. It's a caregiver. And it can be many positive, supportive parents and caregivers and other adults, but it only requires one, because for some of us and for some of our children, there may not really be anyone positive in their life, but they only just need one. Hopefully they will have many throughout their life. But if there's one committed, stable adult, then that is how they will learn to grow and build resilience and heal. So you are the change agent. You are the healing agent. And sometimes that feels very weighty and overwhelming. I don't want you to think of it that way. I just want you to continue to add positive experiences into this child's life, and slowly they will start to heal. Because each early attachment really plays a crucial lifelong role in human adaptation. How loved you felt as a child is a great predictor of how you will manage all those kinds of difficult things that happen and situations later in life. Good enough parenting, and by good enough, I just mean 30%. You don't have to be 100% perfect all the time. That is impossible. It's never going to happen. My children will tell you that I don't even come close to it. But so good enough is just trying, just keeping at it. And when we make a mistake, because we're going to make mistakes, apologize for it. I can't tell you how many times I've had to sit my kids down and say, guys, sorry, I overreacted. I didn't mean to. I apologize. I'm going to do better. And then I really consciously try to do better. And doing that over and over again, modeling that repair and apology also is very healing. So good enough parenting equals secure attachment, and attachment equals resilience. I'm going to talk really quickly about attachment as we talk about how to move into this post-traumatic growth. So once this child has had trauma, we want to move past that and help them grow. And we call that post-traumatic growth. And we help them build resilience. So I just want to go over, because resilience is the science of hope. And hope is the greatest predictor of success. So we definitely want to have hope. And that's what I'm hopefully, sharing with you today, is how to do that. So I know you've probably seen this before. I just want to go through this really quickly because it's important to understand how early, how trauma early impacts on our, sorry, I'm stumbling over my words here, but what I'm trying to say is that when a baby comes into this world and they are ready for connection, they are wired to connection, they're even attuned to the person that was carrying them in their belly for 9 months, that has impacts on them at the earliest of age. Even a child that comes into your home a day or two after birth, comes with everything that has happened to them prior to birth, the good and the bad. That it goes for every human. So what happens when a baby is born? They're wired for connection. They are ready to be cared for. They are completely dependent. They are vulnerable. They have a need. And so they cry. And then when the baby cries, the caregiver feeds them, changes their diaper, comforts them, whatever that need is. And because of that, trust develops. And in a normal, healthy attachment cycle, that happens all day, every day. How many times a day does a baby need to be fed, diapered, comforted? A lot. But it has a very important purpose, and that's that it builds trust. And so that's a healthy attachment cycle. But what happens when those attachment needs are met, when the baby has a need and the baby cries, but the baby's needs are not met? And it doesn't mean that it can happen, you know, if a child is separated from a mom in a NICU stay, right? If a child, it doesn't mean that there has been purposeful abuse. It's just for whatever reason, if there was some type of neglect, that need wasn't met, then the mistrust starts to happen. And that's important to know, because what happens is it creates a skewed view for the child. The child begins to think that the world is unsafe and scary and unpredictable. Now you know. Now you know why this foster child comes into your home, and even though your home is safe, they still don't believe it's safe. They still don't feel that it's safe. They still don't trust you. You want them to trust you, but they don't trust you yet. And so now you know why. They start to think that they don't matter, that they are worthless, and that they can only depend on me. That's why a lot of these kids self-sabotage, and why they are very independent and stubborn. It's a self-survival tool. It's how they've survived this long, is that they've only been able to maybe possibly depend on themselves, or believe that they depend on themselves. So that when children don't get that early repetitive type of care that is healthy, then they're at risk for all kinds of challenges, emotionally, mentally, physically, even if they don't remember. So because the earliest beliefs about themselves happen at that very, very early stage. So promoting healthy attachment for all children is really the key to how we get to that higher level of emotional health and resilience later in life. And it comes from consistent, compassionate caregiving. So hopefully you've been able to hear what I've been saying this whole time, is that repetition, pattern, consistency, when that is paired with compassionate caregiving, then that is how we develop resilience, and how we teach our children to regulate, to calm down. We do that by creating safe environments, modeling compassion, and parenting them at their developmental age, their emotional age, instead of their chronological age. I'm going to read this comment. It feels as if we're just housing our kiddo. He doesn't want to follow any rules or allow us to parent him. He only seems somewhat content when he's doing what he wants to do in the home and at school. When he cannot have his way, he purposefully will exhibit destructive, abusive, or violent behavior. Again, I totally believe you, and this is really hard. And at least for me, I finally kind of had to come to a moment, a decision where I realized I can't completely, totally fix this. And I even now hesitate using the word fix. Once I realized my child doesn't, or this child doesn't need to be fixed. He has gone through some really hard, awful stuff. He does need to heal. But once I started looking at him through those eyes, wanting to help heal him, rather than just wanting to fix him and make him stop doing all those horrible, awful, negative things, here's what it did do. It helped my relationship with him. It helped me not lay awake at night feeling awful and horrible. It was more about me and my expectations and what I wanted out of the relationship than it was about him. So I know that doesn't give a lot of comfort, but it's not the whole answer, but it is a piece of it, because I want you to be okay as a caregiver. This is the hardest job in the world. And a lot of times you do totally just feel like all you are is a house. But I will tell you this, that is very important. You are providing a safe place for this child. And sometimes that's enough. Doesn't feel like it is, because he's destructive and he doesn't like you and he doesn't want to be there. And it doesn't feel like he's changing. And that's really frustrating, because you could probably see his potential. But for now, the only comfort I can offer you, that I can offer you so strongly, is that that may be enough for now. This healing thing may take his whole entire life. My son is almost 24 years old, and we are nowhere near I had hoped or wanted him to be, but he is safe. And some of his decisions don't always keep him safe, but he is safer than he was. He's alive, and I don't know that he would have been alive had he remained in the situation he was in before. And I have compassion towards him, and he comes back to me when he needs. He's not living in our home right now. He's living in an apartment, and he comes to me when he needs help. He doesn't always listen. None of my children like being given advice, but he comes to me to vent, and he comes to me to share what's going on in his life, and I listen, and we have a relationship. So if I can leave you with anything, it's that have that be the goal, that you are a house. I know that you're providing a safe home, a safe environment. He might not feel that right now, but I think as long as you remain there, remain stable, remain consistent, remain who you are, he will see that eventually as a safe environment and be able to start to heal. It's painful. I know it's very painful, but keep going, keep doing what you're doing, because you're probably all that he has and all that he may ever have, and that is enough. It's not ideal, it's not perfect, but sometimes it's enough. And we have to really change our expectations and change the vision of what we want these kids to be. They're not all going to turn out the way that we hoped. And so we have to shift and change that and model what we want for them and be that contagious calm. It takes time and patience, and I wish I had more for you than that, but I do have some things I do want you to try, and we're going to talk about some regulation skills that I want you to try. Okay, any other questions before we move on? And let me just say this, guys, you can reach out to me. I'm going to put my email in the chat box. Why can't I? There it is. Please reach out to me, and I can provide support, education, resources, ideas, as you're going through this struggle. Okay, I'm going to share my screen, and I have so much more to share, and we're not going to get to it, but that's okay. We'll get to whatever we can get to. Somebody had asked about having access to this. I did send Pamela Anderson my PowerPoints, so you can have access to my PowerPoints, and I can give you more notes and information if you want. So you are more than welcome to have this. Okay, we're going to talk about.
Excuse me, and for everyone that I did send that information to your agency. So check with your agency representative, and they should get that information out to you.
Good. Okay, let's talk about how to parent the whole brain of the child, because as I have mentioned before, some of these children don't have access to their whole brain. A lot of these kids only have access to the fear center of the brain. We want to parent the whole brain. This is how we get them into having access to the parts that they have not been using, that have been pruned, that are weak. And the first step that we've talked about is recognizing that their behavior is communicating something. So what is going on with them is not the lying, the stealing, the destruction. It's something causing that. There is a need that they have that they're trying to communicate, and we're not understanding what it is. It's a lagging skill. We have to build their skills and teach them a different way of communicating. So we have to recognize and be aware of that, and recognize that the reactions that they have a neurobiological basis. I want you to picture this stress response system, and I always picture it right here, because when I get nervous, scared, afraid, mad, my heart starts to beat fast, my stomach gets tied in knots, and I feel it right here. But I want you to know that that is not always the case. Some children have described it as headaches, as pain in the head. Some children describe it as foggy brain, being fuzzy, not being able to hear, not being able to see. Sometimes their vision goes cloudy. Some children describe it as tension or pain in their neck and shoulders, or like something stuck right here where they want to say something, or they're trying to say something, but they can't. Something's blocking it. It can be any part of the body, and it's where tension is held. So a lot of times what we do, and we've told children, is to breathe deeply, to open that up and get oxygen to the brain. It pushes out the cloudy brain, and it gives them opportunity to hear better and see better. And then we also try to use grounding skills, which I will teach you, to release that tension wherever it is in the neck and shoulders and back. Those are kind of temporary things, but it gets to how to calm that heart rate down and stop those stress hormones, those adrenaline and cortisol, from flooding. And it replaces it with other hormones like dopamine and cortisol and endorphin and serotonin. And those are the things that help clear out and push out and get rid of all the toxic hormones. So anyway, so we have to recognize that's what's going on. I've talked about the can't versus won't. I really want you to recognize that our expectations, what they're asking them to do, most of the time, they cannot do them. Until, that doesn't mean that we just don't consequence and that we don't, we are overly permissive. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying that in that moment, they can't. In this moment, they can't. In this moment, they can. So this is the goal, to get the lid back down. Okay. And I've talked about that we can change their brains. That's where the hope is. And so that's how we do this. Try not to take it personally. I know it feels very personal. It's very hurtful when they call you all those horrible names, or when they ignore you, or when they disobey you. It's very painful, but it is not personal. It's what is happening inside them. Recognize that that's what's going on. The lid is flipped, and then respond therapeutically. And that does not mean that you have to be a therapist. I don't want you to be a therapist. I want you, hopefully, to have your children in therapy with a connected, an attachment focused and trauma informed therapist. But you as the parent and the foster parent and the caregiver just need to respond in a therapeutic manner. Therapeutic means healing. So we're going to talk about how to be a therapeutic parent and respond therapeutically, because we don't want to re-traumatize them. What we've been doing hasn't been working. You know, he's been in timeout 43 times. That means it's not working. What would work is if we saw that he's not in timeout anymore, right? So We're going to talk about that path parenting that I mentioned, the promoting attachment in a trauma healing way. And it's using all different kinds of therapeutic models. We use it through animals. And I have these cards available if you want, but we'll talk about them. You don't necessarily need them, but we use these just as quick, easy reminders of how to do this type of parenting. And animals really are an easy way to teach this to us as adults and to children. The very first one is safety. I think it was Christy that mentioned safety. We're going to talk about that everyone must feel safe, everybody in the home, and that everyone must feel safe. Those are two different things. There is that physical safety. Now they are in your home and the locks are on the doors, right? And it's a safe environment, but they still might not feel that. And so now we have to create this sense of felt safety. It's these animals and therapeutic parenting tenets that I'm going to teach you, they can kind of go in any order except for the safety. Safety is always first and number one. Nothing else works until the safety is met. So when you're talking about your child in your home and all the things you want to do to help them, all the things you want to put in place, that's great. But none of that matters or works until that child feels safe. So you may be at this stage working on safety for a very long time. It takes a long time to rebuild trust that was taken away from them. So just work on that felt safety for a long time. And how you do that, oops, let me go back. Is through the things that we're going to talk about, creating that structure and that routine and balancing that permissive. We don't want to be overly permissive or overly punitive. We'll talk about that. But I want to talk about connection as well. That's how they feel safe, is beginning to build that relationship, that safe relationship on you. We create safety by using our tone, volume, and cadence of our voice. If we're yelling, that does not create safety. If we're talking too much, too fast, that feels threatening to them because they can't process it. So a lot of times I recommend getting down on their level, not standing above them, looking them in the eyes. Sometimes looking them in the eyes feels threatening to them, so it depends on the child. But talking in a slow, calm, safe voice, that creates safety. And just being very consistent, very predictable, that will teach them, I can predict what's going on in here. I don't have to control it as much. Then I can feel safe. We want you to respond rather than react. That's a hard thing for some of us moms to learn. I'm talking about myself. I had to learn to respond and not to just overreact and get really upset. We have to just kind of continuously create a calm environment that will create the safety. And we do that through structure and nurture. We balance things out and give them boundaries. Children have to have the boundaries, but they've got to be done in a loving way. We just can't pour into these kids enough. They need a ton of nurture. They might not always accept it at first or want it, but continuously giving that compassion and nurture to them will slowly build that safety over time. And you can do that with rules and schedules and routines, finding that balance of being firm and soft at the same time, because children really do need both of them. The balance is really critical. We talked about boundaries. I want to talk about transitions. A lot of these kids, change is really hard. And they have gone through a lot of change, but change makes things feel very unpredictable and that they're not in control. So one of the things that you can do is talk to them about a change that's coming. Talk to them about the schedule. Show them the calendar. Give them time ahead, like in 20 minutes, we're going to do this. In 10 minutes, we're going to do this. Give them notification. That will help them feel safe and give them that boundary, that they know how much time they have left to complete something, right? My kids always melted down when it was time to go, unless I really started preparing them and giving them notification. But for some of these kids, even just like changing the furniture can really trigger them and set them off, because it's something that they had started to feel comfortable with, and now that has changed, and it sends like, it feels threatening to them. So bring them in on decisions. I was thinking of painting the wall. I was thinking of changing your bedroom around. I was thinking about doing that. How would you feel about that? Would it be okay if we went early or left late or changed the calendar? We have to kind of teach them how to be flexible, because appointments get canceled, but that can really send them spinning. So talking about them and making them aware of that, making them a part of the plan. It also really helps to keep their world small and not introduce a lot of new people into their life, not introduce a lot of things that will overwhelm them, keep their world small. We, in this culture of ours, tend to overschedule and put a lot on kids' plates. I encourage you not to do that, but to keep things calm and quiet and consistent, and not introduce a lot of stimuli, including people, and keep their world really kind of controlled and small. That will help them feel safer. I mentioned that calm voice, and keep your body language safe in a non-threatening way. Be very direct and clear and open. And once you really balance that out, then they will feel safe and they will feel seen and understood. A lot of these misbehaviors come out when a child feels invisible. Some children want to feel invisible. And so we want them to feel like we see you, we hear you, we understand you, we are here for you, and that will create safety for them. The next one is regulation. Regulation is that ability to really manage emotions. It's how we calm ourselves. And the thing that I want you to really think about is that it's not that we're stopping those bad emotions. Emotions just are. Feelings are. We don't want to deny a child pain. We don't want them to feel pain, but pain is an important way that they heal, because if we stop the pain and don't let them work through it, they can get stuck there. It doesn't fix it. So instead of taking away the pain and telling them to stop crying, stop yelling, stop doing what they're doing, we have to actually accept those feelings and let them feel them and work through them, and be there side by side, sending them the message that I understand you're angry right now. I can tell you're really frustrated. I'm sorry that that happened to you. I can imagine how painful that is. I'm going to sit beside you. And then that way you're not saying, stop your feelings. You're saying you have feelings. It's okay to have feelings. The behavior is not okay, but the feelings are okay. We can manage those behaviors in a different way. We can talk about being angry. We can punch something safe, not a person, right? Not the wall. We can express our emotions in a safe way. So that's what I'm talking about here. And so there's a lot of, this is where I'm really excited to finally get to this point. I want to show you some fun regulation tools, some important regulation tools that you can use with your kids. But I just want you to, there's three steps to regulation. And the very first one is that you, as the parent and caregiver, have to be calm yourself and stay calm. The stay calm part's kind of tricky, right? When that child is having those very big emotions, it's hard for us to stay calm, but that is what I'm encouraging you to do, to get calm and stay calm before you rush in with the yelling, with the discipline, with the consequences. I want you to take a breath first and be calm, because you're modeling that to them. That's what we want them to do. And so we have to be that way first. So that's the first thing you're going to do. And then you're going to co-regulate with them. And how you do that is to connect with them, be present with them. I mentioned saying, I see that you're frustrated. I see you're angry. I understand. There are times that I feel angry too. I flip my lid too. I can see you're getting there. I'm going to sit here and be with you. Now, I will also say that with teenagers and the slamming of the doors, they might not want you to be there in their face talking to them. So you can let them go to their room and shut the door. And then you can be on the other side of the door saying, I just want you to know I'm here. And when you feel ready, I am ready to be here with you to talk this through, to deal with this. I'm not going to leave you. Because ultimately there's a lot of fear underneath a lot of those behaviors that you're going to abandon them just as if they were abandoned if that was their situation. So you're going to show them that you will always be there and be consistent, that nothing has changed despite this self-sabotage thing is a lot that they want you to prove that, you know, they were right, that they're going to be abandoned again or whatever their situation was. So you're going to prove them wrong saying, no, even though you're self-sabotaging, I am still here. You know, that will take the weight out of that. So you're going to be calm and reflect that calm back to them. That's that mirror, right? Reflecting back that calm, modeling that for them. Do you remember how I said that their chaos can be contagious? So can the calm. So you're going to be calm and reflect that. So your chaos, your calm is contagious. And then I want you just to hold space, be there, not judge. That's the hard part, but accept their feelings. And then once they are calmed back down, that's when you can talk about, okay, how are we going to fix this? How are we going to make this right? That's when you can talk about consequences. Don't talk about consequences until the child is calm. They can't hear you. They can't do what you're asking them to do. But once they are calm, then you can say, we got to fix this. We got to repair this. We got to make it right. How can we do that? I'm going to help you do that. Mirror neurons is just a way of saying that contagious thing that you need to take control and not engage in the chaos and be calm with them so that they can, you know, reflect that back to you. And then the last step of regulation is teaching it. So this is where I want to talk to you about some tools that you can use in order to bring this into your home. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Can you see me so that I can show you this Calm kit that I have? Can you see my Calm kit? If I hold it up and pull things out of it, can someone let me know?
Yes, we can see you.
Okay, awesome. So this is a Calm kit and it can look very different in every different home. So I don't want you to feel pressure that you have to duplicate this. This is just some of the things that have worked for me and that I recommend, but every child is different. And I want you to find out what works for your child, what they like. And this is by no means, it's just it's a way to show you, but there are much more than what goes in here too. So one of the things I wanted to show you really quick was gum, because what happens when we get really, when our lid flips is that we get stuck. And so any movement like chewing gum or even an ice cube in the mouth or drinking, it starts to get your body out of the freeze and activates it. So you can sit with a child who is freaking out and have them chew gum. You can give them an ice cube to suck on, something as easy and cheap as that. Because the other thing is, I don't want you spending money. I want you to recognize things that you may or may not have in the home, or that you could maybe get at a dollar store or something that isn't going to cost you money. Coloring. So a lot of these things that will help a child calm down doesn't have to do with you sitting there, giving them a lecture, telling them to calm down. You don't even have to say anything. You can just hand them a piece of paper and say, do you want to color? Do you want to draw? And do something that just shifts them out. Some of this can't be done until they are more calm, and I probably am going about this backwards. Let me start off with talking about grounding, because they may not be able to, they may throw crayons at you if you immediately say, here, draw, when they're having a tantrum. So the very first thing I usually use is the breathing, the deep breathing techniques. You're not going to be able to see this. This is just a reminder. I have a lot of different fun ways that I teach kids how to deep breathe. I can get you a copy of this if you want. I forgot to do that, but I can get this to you. But what I like to do with kids is give them their own little Ziploc bag or box or envelope that we can cut out these different fun ways to breathe, so that when they're having trouble, you can hand it to them and they can draw out different ways to breathe. So like nostril holding. If you breathe in one and breathe out the other, something as simple as that. Dragon breathing is where you pretend you're a dragon and you breathe in, and then when you breathe out, you can do it really loud, roar like a dragon, or pretend like you're breathing fire. Pizza or pie is where what's your favorite food? A lot of kids will say something like pizza, or something that smells really good like pie or bread. Imagine that pizza or bread, and you want to breathe in that smell. It smells so good. Oh, but it's really hot. So you're going to blow it. And you're going to cool off the pizza or the pie or whatever. So you're going to breathe in, smells so good, cool it off. Same with rose and candle. You've got a rose in this hand and a candle in this one. You're going to smell the rose. You're going to blow out the candle. So they're all variations of the same thing, where you're breathing in and you're breathing out, and that calms them down. So that is a fun way to do that. Once they are starting to get calm, you can use the other things. This is a fidget. There's lots of different kinds of fidgets out there, right? It's just basically something that feels good that you can squish or manipulate or play with. This one has magnets, and so you can, it does all different shapes. It's just fun. It just feels good. And when a child isn't ready to talk, doing this helps them feel better. So eventually, hopefully they'll be able to talk, but a lot of times that's the very last thing that's going to happen. So these are things that you're going to do way before talking to them. Back to the grounding for a minute. A lot of times when kids are freaking out, I will ask them to think of their 5 senses and tell me, buddy, tell me 5 things you can see right now, 4 things you can smell, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can taste, 1 thing you can touch, and you can flip that all around. But it really shifts them. I talked about being stuck, and a lot of times these kids get so stuck they can't think. And so that forces them in a very simple way to think. Oh, I can see the light. I can see the door handle. I can smell what mom's cooking. I can taste my saliva. It doesn't matter what the answers are. The breathing again, you can blow a pinwheel. This is just a straw. This is my encouragement to you. They can blow through the straw, or they can drink something through the straw. Very simple things that actually shift the nervous system response and get them out of fight, flight, freeze into calm. This is a wand that they can count down. They can count how many things they see. It just takes the focus off of whatever they're feeling and puts the focus onto something that calms them down. It just changes what they're doing in the moment. This is all about change, because telling them to stop doesn't work. But if you hand them this and they can just look at it for a minute, all of a sudden their heart will start to beat at a slower pace. Their breathing will start to calm down and regulate, and it just helps them to feel better. This is another fidget. It's a silicone sponge. It's supposed to be used for washing dishes, but it actually just feels really good to the touch. So anything sensory that they can feel and touch and squish, like a squishy ball, or cuddle their blanket, a weighted blanket or a weighted vest, or just a blanket that they can cuddle in. I let my kids create calm corners in their rooms or their closet. And sometimes when they're acting out, I'll say, why don't you take a few minutes and go to your calm corner, or pull out your calm kit, or go to your calm closet. And when you're ready, I'll be right there waiting for you. Or maybe they just want to be held. It's different for every child. These are also kind of squishy manipulatives, like slime, and it's different for everybody. Okay, those are just a few. I have a million more, but I just wanted to show you a few of them. And let me check, because yes, blowing in a bag, breathing in a bag, anything like that is very helpful. Blowing bubbles is fun and gets that breathing going again where they get stuck. So blowing dandelions, anything like that. Okay, there was one more comment I wanted to get to. It's important to remember that sometimes when foster kids do feel safe in your homes, it's when they allow themselves to be the most vulnerable. But it can look like disruption or violence. It's because they trust you, that they feel like they can unleash their raw emotions. It certainly does not make it easier, but when we need to be present the most. This is such a good point, because sometimes it doesn't get easier, it gets worse before it gets better. But that is a good sign of them being able to let it go at home. A lot of times kids at school, they will act out at school. And when that is heavily disciplined, they keep it together at school, but then they come home and let it all out. And that can be really hard. So just know that a lot of times we'll talk about regression actually being progression, because if they have missed developmental steps, which they mostly have, you can't skip developmental steps. Do you remember when I talked about the brain developing from the bottom up, from the inside out? If they have skipped some of this, they have to go back and complete those developmental steps. So a lot of times what it looks like, that's why if a child may have been potty trained, but all of a sudden they're not potty trained anymore, or they're having difficulties, it could be that that's why that they're going back through the developmental stages all over again. So it's temporary, but it can be really frustrating. But instead of punishing that, it's helpful to know that it could be a stress response. It could be a trauma response. It could be that they're progressing, but they're going and rebuilding and rewiring. And it looks like a problematic behavior, but it's actually a way to rewire that neural pathway so that they can become potty trained or whatever behavior it is again, but we have to go through those stages again first. So regression can actually be progression. I am gonna go back to my screen and see if I missed anything here on the regulation, because this is a huge piece. Dr. Bruce Perry talks about that regulation is best done with these R's. And so, sorry, I'm letting more people in the waiting room. Okay. Relational, meaning in connection. We don't heal in isolation. These children need a stable, committed caretaker, caregiver to connect with them and relate with them and be side by side with them, healing them. So that's how we regulate. We do it together. That's why it's called co-regulation. They can't do it on their own. And we have to regulate in a way that matches them. If you're, going on those car rides and talking can be really regulating, but might not be for a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old. Do you know what I mean? It has to kind of match their age. and also remember that they're younger than their cognitive or their chronological age. Rhythmic regulation really works. So that's why we always encourage things like rocking, swinging, bouncing, jumping. Anything that's repetitive and rhythmic really helps those neural patterns rewire. There's many more that we can talk about, but I'm going to move on because I can see we're running out of time and I want to get to everything. Connection. Oh, let me go back to these otters really quick, because do you see how they're holding hands? It's called rafting, and it's so that they don't lose each other. And that just reminds us we have to stay connected even during the really difficult times. It's really difficult to stay connected when someone's saying, I hate you. I don't want to be near you. So just be aware that we have to keep trying, and it may look like different things. It might not, probably won't be holding hands, but it's just different ways to connect. So try especially connecting before you offer correction. And we can do that through this PACE model by Dr. Dan Hughes. It's all about being playful. That creates that environment of safety when we make things fun. And the A also stands for accepting. Do you remember when I talked about holding space, being accepting of their feelings, being attuned to their needs? And then curious is that iceberg, finding out what's going on. I see that they're lying. I see that they're running away. I see that they're self-sabotaging. I'm really curious, why are they doing that? What's going on underneath? What is the need that's not being met? And then empathetic means just continuing with that compassion, understanding why they are doing what they are doing, so that they feel felt, that they feel that we see them, we hear them, we understand. And we do that in a very intentional way. We have to be intentional. This is a father penguin. Did you guys know that the father penguin is the one that sits on the egg for like 2 months after the mom lays the egg? And so male role models can be such an important part of these children's lives, and we wanted to include them in that thought and remind us that we have to be intentional and be present and parent with a purpose and have a plan, and be, if we are co-parenting, to be on that same plan, to be on that same page together, and to really work together as a team, because these kids oftentimes try to triangulate and get in the middle of us. And if they don't get what they want from mom, then they go to dad and try to manipulate that. But I will say, it's not willful manipulation or willful disobedience. It looks like it, it feels like it. And in some ways, it is in the sense they are trying to control, but it's a result of a trauma reaction and a way that they know that they can survive to control the situation. So be careful with things like manipulation and try to reframe it as seeking a need, kind of like we're reframing the attention seeking, we're reframing it to connection seeking. So look at it through that different lens. Okay, I mentioned that that framework we had is taken from a lot of different models. These are the models. You may have heard of some of them, you may not have, but when you're working with a therapist, talk to them about these different models, and hopefully this is what they are implementing in the practice. And you can implement some of these at home too, and you can do it through what I've been talking about. But I'm gonna kind of skip through this because we're running out of time. I wanted to share this resource with you. This is Rebecca Britt, and she was a foster care worker for a long time and has been a foster care parent. And she has a podcast that is very focused on foster care, which is brilliant. It's very specific. So if you go to Stable Moments podcast, it's free. It's brilliant. And she gives a lot of advice and ongoing support and resources. I don't think we have time to go over this today, but I did give you a handout. I don't know if you can see me holding this up, but this slide talks about how trauma can impact the learning at schools and how and why. This is something you can give the child's teacher so that you can be on the same page. And it really helps to understand what's going on rather than just looking at like, they're not behaving at school. Well, here's why. Here's what's really going on. I don't have time to talk about this, but I want to let you know that children who have high ACE scores did not adequately get stimulated in their growth when it comes to the auditory, visual, and sensory processing, because it's in this part of the brain. So oftentimes these are delayed. And when a child can't adequately hear you, see you, or integrate what they're feeling, it comes out in negative behaviors. And we punish those, and we shouldn't, because this is what's going on, that they have challenges that need to help. There's a lot of things that we can do to help them. When we talk, we can slow things down. We can play to their strengths. Ask them if they understood. Repeat back to me what you heard so that you can be on the same page. Games build skills, and that's a fun way to create relationship. Auditory therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy if it needs to be. And in the classroom, there can be modifications. You can record what the teacher says so that you can play it back at home if you're helping with homework. And then check in with them and ask them how they're doing and if they are getting overwhelmed and overstimulated. That sensory processing disorder is very common and can really make a child oversensitized or undersensitized. So we have to watch out for that. And then at school, let's have a plan for what happens when they become dysregulated. Is there a safe place? Is there a calm room? Can they go to the school counselor? Can someone at the school, like the school counselor, regulate with them? Get everybody on the same page. And then a lot of the things that we talked about before with, modeling that repair. If they misbehave at school, instead of jumping to the consequence or going to the disciplinary room or whatever, they've got to calm down first, and then we can talk about how to fix it. So break down directions. These are the helps for the teacher at school and for you to help the child at school. These are things that you can do. Oops, let me go back. Model, give them organizers, things that are visual, like a calendar, what they need to do next for homework. Chunk it down into very small pieces so they don't get overwhelmed. And then I just wanted to touch base on behavior modification systems like star charts and sticker charts and things like that, and let you know that they don't work. A lot of schools use these, and it shames the children and it embarrasses them because they can't. Remember how we talked about if their lid is flipped, they can't do what we ask them to do. So they can't follow those directions and maintain that level of regulation in the class, and then they get punished for it, and their sticker chart and the level chart gets taken away, and they get embarrassed and shamed, and it just makes things worse, and we actually re-traumatize these kids because of it. And so I really want you to avoid those in your home and encourage the teachers to avoid those in the school setting. If things can be modified in your home or at the school with lighting, that helps with sensory issues. Let the children have as much recess and breaks as possible, because the recess and the movement regulates the child. It calms them down. They have to have brain breaks and physical breaks. So hopefully you can encourage teachers to do that at school, and you can do that at your home as well. Give them lots of breaks that way. This is talking about working with the school as a team. Ask a lot of questions so that you can get on the same page. And if you're working with getting an IEP or a 504 plan, I talk a lot about that in different webinars. We don't have time today, but it's something you want to collaborate with the school and be on the same page, and advocate for your child. And this is ways that you can advocate. I know I'm rushing, I apologize, but we've only got a few minutes left. These are resources that I do encourage, but I know it can be overwhelming. So some suggestions, you're going to have access to this. So if I flip through the screen and you haven't read it, you'll have a way to look at it later. I also wanted to let you know that I have a podcast that also gives a lot of these suggestions and helps so that you can have ongoing resources, and it's free. It's called Regulated and Relational. So these are things that we talk about all the time to give extra support to you parents. This is how you can get a hold of me. And if you would like to join the Attachment and Trauma Network, you can join for free. We have free membership, but that gives you a lot of access to our resources and help. Okay, I am rushing and I apologize. There was one more thing I wanted to get through and I'm not going to have time, so I'm just going to tell you that I really also want you to focus on taking care of yourselves. And that shouldn't feel, sometimes that feels like a lot of pressure. It feels like you're all on your own and you're isolated. That's not what I mean. I want you to have a team. I went to a training this summer with Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, and she is the Surgeon General of California. And she said that a lot of times we as caregivers are told, put on your oxygen mask first, and then you can take care of your kid, right? And that's true. But what she said was, you don't need an oxygen mask. You need like a scuba tank filled with scuba gear and that whole oxygen tank that helps you. And you need a scuba diving partner because you are doing some serious hard work and you're going to be underwater for a lot of time. And that makes us feel like we're drowning. We don't want you to drown. We want you to have a team, a partner, lots of oxygen. You need help. You need respite. You need breaks. You need support. So I offer myself and the Attachment Trauma Network as a support to you. I know you have supports through the people that brought you here today. Hopefully you have good friends that you can vent to and that can be a good support to you. And I want you to know that you're not alone and that this is big, heavy. Okay. All right. I don't want you to feel overwhelmed. Sometimes when I talk, I think I am like a fire hose giving out a lot of information. Just want you to pick out one or two things that you think you can incorporate in your home with your child, and try some new things. And I want you to focus also on yourself and how you're feeling when your child overreacts or isn't reacting. Where is it feeling inside of you? So that you can model to the child how to handle it when you don't feel good, when you're stressed out. I want you to teach them what it looks like to flip their lid, and that I want you to tell them, listen, I flip my lid. I'm not perfect. I don't want you to be perfect. I want you to make mistakes, and then we're going to fix those mistakes. That kind of attitude creates a sense of safety when you're just accepting them as who they are, as imperfect human beings. So anything else that you can think of or want to talk about?
I know there was a comment that stated, could you go back to the resource slide so we can take a picture? However, just to reiterate that a representative from your agency has copies of each thing that was shown today. So reach out to that person to get a copy of the handouts. right, thank you so much, Ginger, for this fabulous presentation today.
You are welcome.